Okay, so today we're going to dive into something that's really dominating the headlines right now.
Yeah, absolutely. This dramatic escalation in the Middle East.
Exactly. With the recent U.S. strikes, Iranian retaliation, it feels like a really high stakes moment.
It definitely is, and it puts a huge spotlight on these critical choke points, these narrow waterways that are just so vital.
Right. And today we wanted to zero in on one of the most critical ones.
The Strait of Hormuz.
That's the one. In this deep dive, we're going to try and cut through some of the noise.
Yeah, using the sources we've looked at, try to figure out how likely a major disruption really is there.
And what that would actually mean,
Yep.
for the global economy, for oil prices.
And maybe are there ways to sort of dial things back to de-escalate?
We want to help you understand why this little strip of water is so important and, well, what any trouble there could mean for your daily life.
From the gas pump to maybe even the grocery store.
Exactly.
So let's start with just how big a deal this strait is. The sources, they call it, what an unequivocally critical, strategically sensitive energy corridor.
Yeah, it's the main way out for oil from Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, Kuwait, all the big Gulf producers.
We're talking like huge volumes.
Massive. Something like 20% of the world's daily oil consumption, about 20 million barrels.
Wow.
And a quarter of the world's natural gas, too.
Yeah.
All squeezing through this one narrow passage.
So that gets disrupted. It's not just numbers on a screen.
No, not at all. It means, well, inflation goes up everywhere, businesses could fail, your purchasing power.
Yeah.
It really takes a hit, globally.
Okay, so it's crucial. Now, Iran has threatened to close it before, plenty of times.
Oh, yeah, it's a recurring threat.
So given everything that's happening now, what are the experts saying? How likely is a full, sustained closure? Has it ever actually happened?
Well, that's the interesting thing. Despite all the talk, all the threats over the years,
It hasn't happened.
never. It's never been fully closed. And the consensus among experts, like Claudio Descalzi from INI, is that it's pretty remote. He basically said Iran is more rational than that.
Right. And that rationality, it kind of comes down to a paradox for Iran, doesn't it?
How so?
Well, blocking it completely would be, shooting themselves in the foot
Yeah.
massively. Their own oil exports would just stop instantly.
Right. So it damages their own economy, which is already under pressure.
Exactly. It's a powerful threat to make sure a useful geopolitical lever.
Yeah.
But actually doing it, that would be, well, catastrophic for them.
Okay, so self-harm is a big deterrent. What about the U.S. side? Is there like a clear red line here?
Oh, absolutely unequivocal.
Hmm.
Former Pentagon folks say the U.S. would react decisively with, quote, unbelievable force.
Unbelievable force. Okay.
Yeah. And past statements, like from President Trump, made it clear the U.S. is ready to use overwhelming air and missile power if Iran tries to mine the strait or attack key infrastructure.
So it's a non-starter for the U.S. Critical energy security, non-proliferation. It's a definite red line.
Absolutely.
Okay, so a full blockade seems unlikely. But what about, say, smaller disruptions, even temporary ones? What would that do to oil prices?
Well, even that would cause an immediate, significant spike. J.P. Morgan, for instance, they projected Brent crude could climb pretty high in a, quote, worst-case scenario.
How high are we talking?
Potentially up towards $130 a barrel.
$130. Wow, and you'd feel that everywhere, wouldn't you?
Oh, yeah. Imagine the cost of everything that gets shipped. Electronics, food, clothes, all suddenly costing more because transport costs just exploded.
Okay, so major global impact. What about specific countries? You mentioned Asia earlier.
Right. Asian refiners, China, and India especially, they'd be hit hardest. They rely heavily on that Gulf oil and LNG.
Makes sense.
But what's really interesting is that India apparently has already been diversifying, buying more oil from places like Russia and the U.S.
Proactively trying to reduce that vulnerability.
Exactly. It kind of highlights a strategic shift maybe other nations are considering or perhaps should be.
That's a really interesting point about India. So with these clear lines drawn, these economic vulnerabilities, what about de-escalation? Are there any pathways out of this tension?
Well, there are calls for it. The international community, the UK Prime Minister urging Iran back to the table. And interestingly, even President Trump apparently extended an olive branch amidst the military actions.
An olive branch? How does that work?
The strategic thinking, or maybe hope from the U.S. side, seems to be that maybe taking away some of Iran's nuclear leverage might push them towards wanting a peace deal.
But does that seem likely? The sources we looked at suggested Iran hasn't shown much appetite for concessions right after the strikes.
Yeah, that's the tricky part.
Could military action actually backfire, push Iran to, double down on seeking nuclear weapons as the only deterrent left?
That is the huge risk, isn't it? Finding a diplomatic path that Iran sees as credible, one that actually addresses their security worries, that's incredibly difficult right now.
Seems like a real balancing act. You don't want to open a whole new chapter of conflict.
Precisely. The stakes are just immense for finding that balance.
Okay, so let's just recap quickly what we've covered in this deep dive. A full, sustained closure of the Strait of Hormuz seems highly improbable.
Right. Too damaging for Iran itself, and the U.S. response would likely be swift and overwhelming.
But, and this is the crucial part, any attempt at disruption, even a smaller one, would still send oil prices soaring, potentially towards that $130 Brent crude mark in a worst-case scenario.
Yeah, with huge ripple effects across the whole global economy.
Yeah.
And hitting Asian importers like China and India particularly hard.
So these clear red lines, the economic fragility, it really shows how precarious global stability can be, doesn't it? Even when the worst-case scenario seems unlikely.
It really does. Which brings us to a final thought, maybe something for you to consider.
Okay.
If nations keep proactively diversifying their energy sources, like we saw with India trying to move beyond these traditional choke points like Hormuz, what does that mean for the future of energy security? And, thinking longer term, what kind of shifts in geopolitical power might that eventually lead to? Something to chew on.